So living in the light, when John pens this epistle, he's actually addressing a particular context. False teachers known as Gnostics had essentially infiltrated the church, and they had brought a teaching that said that the Christian life can be a life of lip service rather than life service, a life in which the faith was merely something that was lived in abstraction and not actually lived in practical reality. And so many folks that came under the sway of this false gospel actually found themselves becoming what's known as antinomians, those who kind of live lawless lives and found themselves essentially abandoning the church, abandoning the fellowship of believers. The Christian life is one that's lived in moral purity and one that's lived in practical holiness. And so he's wanting to really distinguish between the true gospel, which would actually train us to renounce unrighteousness and ungodliness, and the false gospel, in which these people essentially accepted and went off to live in darkness. Okay, and so one of the ways in which that is practically lived out, the idea of walking in darkness, of walking in the light, means that we live our lives in such a way that we exemplify the light of Christ, that we don't just talk about being Christians, but we actually turn from darkness to light in practical ways, the ways in which we engage our neighbors, the ways in which we engage the world, the ways in which we think, and the ways in which we talk. And so Christ comes to make a claim on our entire lives, not just our souls, but also our bodies, and also everything about our lives. And that's really the focus of that passage, to really make that distinction very clear for us. Another thing is that walking in the light is not done in isolation. It's not something that we can do by ourselves. But these false believers, when they came under this false gospel, ended up walking away from the church, ended up distancing themselves from believers. And when John says, to walk in the light, he's essentially saying walk amongst the community of people who have the light. Walk amongst God's people and live life in fellowship and in communion with them. He goes on to say that the blood of Christ cleanses us from all unrighteousness. And that's a really important thing. Oftentimes when we think about, sort of modern cleansers, we think about covering over the stain, right? But modern cleansers are actually things that use a variety of chemical mechanisms, chemical processes to loosen the stain and to loosen its grip off of something that it had stained. And that's exactly the way the blood of Christ works. It doesn't just cover our sin, but it actually loosens the grip of sin on our lives, so that we find ourselves as renewed, restored people of God, not only justified, but also sanctified, as the blood of Christ really frees us from not only the penalty of sin, but also from the presence of sin. And as the light of Christ comes into our lives, we find ourselves walking into the light, walking in the light more and more, walking in a way that manifests the light of Christ, walking in a way that looks more like Jesus, and we live our lives in a way that finds ourselves being conformed more to the image of Christ.